Hello and welcome to the third part in a series of videos where I show how I've painted some Titans from Games Workshop's Adeptus Titanicus game in the colours of Legio Mordaxis. In this part I go through some simple planning steps to try and make each Titan visually unique and then show how I upload the colour using Citadel contrast paints. So all the armour panels have been dappled with silver, so we're now ready to go on to the next step. Now the next step actually isn't painting. The next step is to work out a bit of planning and work out exactly what armour panel you want what colour. So this is my very bad drawing. I'm not a drawer. Just because I can paint models reasonably well doesn't mean I can actually draw for toffee. But these bizarre frog-like pictures are actually my reavers. So each block represents a specific armour panel. So you've got the feet, the two parts of the shin pads, knees and so on. What I've done is I've gone through and with a purple and black pen just roughly marked out what I think I'm going to do. I'm probably going to do all the weapons black because that just makes it a little bit easier. Legio Mordaxis is quite different from other Legios because it actually only has two primary colours. This actually, it makes it easier from a painting perspective because you've only got two things to contend with, but actually it makes it more difficult from trying to balance it out because it's very easy to go, oh, I'll just do the feet black, or well actually I want to have that on number 3 or number 4. You suddenly end up with this scenario where you've got a lot of repetition. The purple and black also is very dark. So you have to be careful that when you put them on the tabletop, it's not going to pop. So this is why I've tended to weigh more heavily with the purple, which is the more vibrant colour, towards the top, and the darker towards the bottom. I also will be taking a little bit of artistic license and introducing like an ashy white, off-white colour that I'll be doing probably in stripes and markings and potentially on the plain carapace. But that will be done on top of the purple or black. This just allows you to kind of sponge it on or lightly airbrush it so it looks like it's actually been painted. So it's not deviating from the purple and black armour by a massive amount. Once I worked these out, what I did was I grabbed the sprue and I actually drew on them with a permanent marker. You can see on both. So that one's purple, that one's black. That way, when I'm actually airbrushing it, it's very easy to jump from panel to panel. I load up my airbrush with the purple and I can just do all the purples. It's probably also worth pointing out that this is the Warhound sprue that I've not used for demonstrations because it's a bit smaller. But what I've done is I've blue tacked in the grills. That might seem a bit strange because we'll be going later on, we'll be going in with a paintbrush to fix a lot of any overspills. But by blue tacking these in now, that means I've got less to paint. So you may prefer, if you're doing a different Legio, you might prefer to do this on other panels. One thing that you may have spotted is the fact that I'm not actually doing any half and halves. One of the very common things on a lot of Titans is you get half a panel done one colour and half done another, or quarters or stripes or whatever. The reason for that is because I am using a transparent paint in the form of contrast. If you put a transparent paint on top of a transparent paint, you get a funny colour that doesn't match anything. You can mask, if you're really hot with your masking tape, you can mask half off, spray the one colour, unmask, mask the colour you've done and then put the second colour. However, you will get a line wrong. The panels are very small, so why take that risk? So with the exception of this one, which has got half and halves, but that's because you've got a left and right side on the legs. I'm going to tidy this up. These, what I tend to do is I tend to get these and just blue tack them off to one side on some of my paint racks and whatnot. That way you very quickly got a way of seeing what you're up to. So I'll get myself ready and then I'll show you how I actually go through and applying the contrast paint, which is probably the real reason you're here. Done a lot of preparation, as you probably have realised. Techniques where you're applying thin layers on top of silver, the preparation that you do on the silver layer is actually more important than applying the colour. That's why it's worth spending that time getting it ready. The colour we're going to use for the purple is Shyish purple. Now, if you've never used contrast paints before, they are a little bit strange in comparison to a lot of normal paints. They're fundamentally an acrylic ink that has got specific flow agents and retarders in, so when you wash them over, say, a white undercoat, it flows into the recesses and shades it and such like. We're not using it, we're just using it as basically a colour layer on top of silver. These pigments are very strong. They will stain. If you get this on a t-shirt or an article of clothing, the only way you will get this out is by stripping off immediately and taking your article of clothing, dumping it in the sink and completely submerging it in water. It will come out, but if you leave it and it starts to dry, it won't. This will actually stain most things, to be honest. It will stain your cutting mat, which is why I always do for airbrushing anyway, but I put a sheet of greaseproof paper down. That way, if I spill it, it's not a problem. Also, make sure you've got some kitchen towel, blue roll, etc. handy, so that if you do have a spill, you just go splunk and you immediately mop it up. I'm not a fan of putting my contrast paint straight into my airbrush, because it's not that they're going to stain, they're stainless steel primarily. But I just find you get a little bit of extra control by pre-thinning it. I use tattoo pots. These you can pick up. This is a medium size, so you want a medium or large. The small's too small, but you pre-thin it and then you can just pop it in, and you can then bin that, put it in, rinse it out, put it in the recycling, whatever. They're just little disposable. They cost something like, you get 100 for sort of under £10. I am using regular airbrush thinner. Contrast medium isn't necessary. You could use it if you wanted to. I don't think you really need to. Contrast medium is designed really for when you're using it with a brush, so that you don't affect the contrast properties. We're not using that for this. So the ratio I've gone with this is two parts, or 2 drops airbrush thinner to 1 part Shyish purple. You can, if you're not very confident with your airbrush, you could thin it a little bit more, and that just means that you will have to work a little bit harder to get the layers up. If you want a really thick coat on, a real solid dark coat, you can just increase the amount of Shyish purple. But for me, I found 2 parts of this to 1 part works fantastically. Make sure you mix up enough. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we'll do 10 of this and then 5 of this. Now, without getting into the big question over dropper bottles versus pots, etc., I tend to keep my contrast paints in their pot, because if ever I want to use contrast straight onto a model, I can just take it straight out the pot. If I put it into a dropper bottle, I'd have to put it onto a palette, which then tends to bleed out and starts to dry. So, but it is ultimately horses for courses. I use a pipette for getting the paint out. Make sure you shake your contrast paints well. Shyish purple is quite forgiving because it doesn't separate much. Same with Black Templar. But some of the other ones, like Ultramarine Blue, separates. You get a sediment at the bottom. So like I say, we want 5 of these. Get my head out of the way. Put the rest back in, and then try and clean your pipette a little bit. Now, generally, this pipette's on its last legs anyway, but generally I will then go and wash this out in a sink. It just means that it lasts that little bit longer. Then take your old brush, mix it around, and you will see. There we go. It is quite dark. That's fine. So, that's typically the airbrush compressor kicks in. So you just pull that straight in. There we go. Now, I will make sure you put this somewhere out of the way. There we go. That's fine. Now, one nice thing with contrast paints is the fact that they don't actually tend to clog the airbrush up in the same way as a normal acrylic. So you will find it a little bit more forgiving as you're going. And all you're trying to do, I found one of my panels that's purple, and just gently airbrush over. And you can see you've got a very light covering. Do not douse it in paint. You're just looking to put a light covering on. It doesn't take too long to build up. But what you want to do is to make sure that you've actually got a covering on there, which helps just to make the contrast bind. Let's see. And now I know by doing that one, the first one is going to be dry. So, now make sure you go from more than one angle. So trying to do this for the camera is a little bit more tricky because you're trying to keep everything in shot. But if I rotate round, and hopefully you can already see that here, where I had at the front of that shoulder pad, where I had less of the middle silver and just the lower silver, it's already slightly darker than the top. So, go from a few different angles. Once you've done a couple of coats, you can start going a little bit more heavily on. And there we go. You can be quite, what's nice with this is you can actually be quite accurate. So, there we go. That is a really nice coverage of the purple. Hopefully you can kind of see that. So, in order to try and add a little bit more depth, let's just clean the tip off. What you can actually do is you can go back in with the purple, but just where you want that extra depth. So, for example, at the front, you can just carry on pushing that. And where the Shyish purple is nice and deep as a colour, you actually suddenly you've got even more depth. So you might want to do that. I will be doing that around the edge of the panels. And this also just helps with anywhere that you've got your mid silver. If you went a little bit too heavy with that, or you got rid of the dark silver a bit too much, you can actually kind of reintroduce the depth. Go in the middle of the eye of Horus. There we go. And what you're looking to achieve is you can actually see it quite well on camera, you still want that nice sort of slightly metallic reflection to it. So that is the process. It's exactly the same with the black. And you just need to plod on and do it nice and slow and steady. As with the rest of my bits, I'm going to take this off camera and I'll carry on doing that. When it comes to your actual Titans itself, as you saw, you can be very accurate with, you don't get massive amount of overspray. Just do exactly the same. You are going to get some overspray on things like the exhaust ports, etc. That's fine because we will touch them up with a brush. You've already got lighter silvers on there which we will want to get rid of. And that will be done at the same time as we do the trim. I hope that part 3 has shown how you can achieve the metallic purple and black colours I've used on Legio Mordaxis. It's really easy to adapt this using different contrast colours too. In part 4 I go through starting to remove the armour panels from the sprues I'd love to hear from you, so please leave comments or questions below and feel free to subscribe to my channel or follow me on Twitter or Instagram.